All right, good afternoon, class. We are going to be doing a mystery science activity to highlight the science standard that we've been working with, but I'll start off with the generic question that we're going to be dealing with today. It's called, why are some apples red and some apples green? And I'll take us back to the standard that we've been covering. It's been the heredity and inheritance and variation of traits. Students will analyze and interpret data to provide evidence that plants and animals have traits inherited from parents and that variation of these traits exists in a group of similar organisms. With that, the student goal for today will be that students will analyze that students will understand that plant and or animal offspring inherit a variation of traits from their parents, and that this phenomenon can be observed and subsequently analyzed and interpreted to disclose familial groups. So specifically, we're going to be talking about the traits of apples. So we're going to be focusing more on the plant aspect of this standard. But we also need to talk about collaboration, because it's really important that as students learning, we're able to collaborate with our classmates. So students will work in collaborative groups with their classmates to analyze and interpret the inheritance of trait variations among plants and animals. And also, students will learn how to present their findings in complete sentences and use provided sentence frames, both written and both in writing and orally. So what this means is that you need to work collaboratively with your classmates. You need to take turns talking and having conversations and sharing your insights. And you also need to disclose this information when we're having a whole class discussion in complete sentences, because in order to be good scientists, we also need to speak clearly and articulately, and we need to talk about our insights in an accurate way. So let's start with our mystery. And again, this is just an overview. We're not going to actually spend the time discussing things right now, but we're just going to start it right now. So this is about the history of apples. This is what apples used to look like way back in the day. And then we would go into the discussion of how could you grow your own sweet apples. And this would be an example of a question that students would discuss in their groups. They would discuss ideas on how we would grow apples and whatnot. And hopefully it would lead to the conclusion that students can actually plant the seeds, which you can think of as baby apples, from the sweet apples that you would find at the grocery store. And then this leads into this discussion of in what ways are you different than your siblings. And this goes back to our discussion, our vocabulary on traits and heredity. As we said before, traits are distinguishing qualities or characteristics, and they typically belong to a person. So when you think of traits, what color eyes do you have? What color hair do you have? Are you tall? Are you short? Are you somewhere in between? So specifically for apples, what we want to find out is, what traits do we look for in apples when we want to eat them? Typically, we think of, apples need to be sweet. Some people like a crunch to their apple, and we're going to be discussing some of those traits when we do our apple taste test, because that is eventually what we want to do with this science experiment. Okay, and then the last part, by the end of this lesson, is that students will be able to answer, how did we get from small crab apples, that's what we used to call apples a long time ago, thousands of years ago, to large red and green apples today. And by the end of this, hopefully the consensus will be somewhere along the lines that every few years, farmers grew bigger and bigger apples by selecting their favorites from apple trees. So as this discussion goes by and students are able to watch all of the videos, they can come to this consensus, because that's one of the qualities, one of the traits that farmers and consumers of apples, they wanted to grow bigger apples, they wanted to grow sweeter apples. Okay. All right, so now we're going to do our apple taste test. And actually, let me go over assessments first. So after the students are done with their with the exploration part, they're able to watch the videos, which is a good UDL technique, because sometimes information is better internalized when you can watch a video about it, and students are more engaged that way. We also want to go to our assessment. And so our assessment, we have the end of mystery assessment. right here that we can download that all students will be given a copy of, as you can see here. I'll also have the option that students can, I'll print it out, but students can also, type it on a piece of paper if they want to, if they're worried about their penmanship. I don't want that to be a deciding factor with their assessment, so they can either handwrite it or they can also type it on a piece of paper. All right, so other things that I do like about this mystery science activity is that there's other ideas for developing deeper understanding. You can read about other fruits and vegetables, why they grow fast, how they grow, and then you can also extend it to a language arts extension of writing about a magical apple. So students can use their creativity to write a story about a magical apple. I really like this because it helps build up their language arts, their ability to write and discuss, about an apple. They could even use some of the vocabulary and some of the things that they learned from this experiment to include in their apple. And then I'll go back to the math extension later because that will actually be a part of our taste testing activity. All right. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do our taste testing activity. So I'm not going to actually cut into these apples, but for the experiment, when I would be in the class with the students, I would cut 4 different kinds of apples. Actually, I just have 2, but again, this is just a model. You cut into them, provide a small slice of apple for all the students, and then each student would have an apple taste test paper that they would use to record some of their notes, because another important fact or important part of science experiments is that you write about and you take notes on what you're observing. So this is an apple taste test. I think it's really fun. It's engaging because students get to use their sense of taste and not just writing and observing through sight. So we have 4 different kinds of apples that students are going to be tasting. We have Granny Smith, Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, and Honey Crisp. And I did this experiment on my own already, but so we have, what the apple's called, what color is it, because again, that goes back to our question that we wanted to answer. Why are some apples green? Why are some red? I also added notes because I think that notes are really important with any science experiment. You want to use them as an extension, an explanation of what you're seeing and how sweet is it. So again, this how sweet is it part goes back to the trait that most people most consumers, when they want to buy apples, are thinking about how sweet it is. Personally, I also think of the crisp factor, so I added the notes aspect so I could write more notes about that. So when I tried the Granny Smith, it's green, obviously. I thought the taste was slightly sour, but I thought that it had a nice crunch, and personally, I think it would go great with caramel. So that was the what I thought about the Granny Smith. Next, I had the Red Delicious. It's red, obviously, as the name suggests. I thought it was slightly sweet, but it was mushy, and I therefore didn't enjoy it that much. Moving on to Golden Delicious. It has a golden yellow color, tinges of green. Like I said, I'm very detail-oriented with that. And then I thought that it was slightly sweet. I thought that it was still mushy, less mushy than the Red Delicious, but only slightly. So then we moved on to Honey Crisp. And so the Honey Crisp is kind of a red-yellow color, almost in a brindle pattern, which I think is really pretty. I thought that it was very sweet, and it was crisp, crunchy, and I could have it anytime. It's an apple that I would choose if I wanted to, have an apple for a snack or with lunch or whatnot. So therefore, what's my favorite apple? My favorite apple was Honey Crisp. So extending on to the math extension of this lesson, students could create a graph titled, "What apple do you prefer?" We would need to gather data from all of the different students in the class, but the x-axis or the horizontal axis would be the type of apple. I have all 4 of them listed here. And then the number of people would be on the y-axis or the vertical axis. and then we would draw squares to symbolize, one person. So obviously my favorite was the Honeycrisp, so therefore I would put one square above Honeycrisp, and as the other students decided what their favorite apple was, we'd collect data on that and we could ask certain questions on that. Okay, and then I think that is it, but what I did want to do was go back to this website, because you are also provided with the student link that I'll send out to all of the students when we were doing this, so that they could actually perform this at home. They could extend this science lesson to including some of their family members, seeing what their family members preferred in terms of, green, red apples, what kind of apples and whatnot, and they could practice these skills at home. Thank you for watching.